Hello, everyone. Can you believe this is our last week of work before the final exam? Are you as sad as I am? Well, probably not. We still have a few things left for grading, so we better work through our tiers and get started on this overview. Well, welcome to This Week in the History of American Politics. Week 7 is our last edition of the history of politics for this course. So let's get started. The subject today is a meeting that declared the lack of representation in the British Parliament, and it occurred 11 years prior to the Declaration of Independence. And the event is the Stamp Act Congress that convened in New York City protesting the British Stamp Act on the American colonies on October 7th, 1765. The turmoil started earlier in 1765 when the British Parliament approved a little noticed measure in Britain called the Stamp Act on March 22nd, 1765. Parliament required colonists to pay taxes on every page of printed paper they used. The tax also included fees for playing cards and dice. What is interesting to note is that this type of tax had already been going on in Great Britain for several years, and the British Parliament felt that the American colonies should have to pony up for to help with the paying for the 7 Years' War. The proceeds from the act would further defray the expenses of defending, protecting, and securing the colonies from attacks. It was a measure to make the colonists pay costs for hosting British troops on the continent and assist in paying for the costs of the 7 Years' War. Now, the 7 Years' War we know as the French and Indian War. The new tax amounted to a sales tax for the colonists, which didn't sit well with many of the residents who considered themselves quite removed from such measures. The protests were based on a legal principle that the colonial legislatures only had the power to tax residents who had representatives in those legislatures. In other words, only state or colonial legislatures within the colony had the ability to tax its own citizens on a sales tax. So this became a problem. And even though some colonies had official agents to Parliament, like Benjamin Franklin, no colonies had sitting representatives in the British Parliament. Benjamin Franklin wasn't a member of Parliament. He was a member of a representation, actually just for the colony of Pennsylvania, not for the American colonies as a whole. But he did work in that situation many times. But really and truly, it was the state of the colony of Pennsylvania that sent him to England to look after their own affairs. In May 1765, Virginia's Patrick Henry wrote the Virginia Resolves, which clearly laid out the, quote, taxing without representation argument. Now, there's something familiar to us. No taxation without representation. The protests against the Stamp Act also were particularly strong in Massachusetts. That summer, Massachusetts called for a meeting of all the colonies, a Stamp Act Congress, to be held in New York in October 1765. Committees of correspondence were also formed in the colonies to protest the act. Now, committees of correspondence are simply how it sounds, that these committees would be in contact with the other colonies and updating information, staying in touch with each other, and quite frankly, it had never happened before, not on a formal basis, but now the colonies had a line of communication that was formal and was between each colony in North America. The Stamp Act Congress met for 18 days On October 19th, the delegates approved Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which stated the joint position of the delegates for other colonies, and this read, Resolution 3, 4, and 5 made clear that while the delegates repeatedly stressed their loyalty to the Crown, the issue of taxes was at the forefront. They still considered themselves Englishmen, but they were being persecuted by the laws of England of no taxation without representation, which they had within the realm of the Great Britain for many, 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 many years. Another resolution complained about admiralty courts conducting direct trials. This is it was against the British law for a admiralty court to decide civil court cases. An admiralty court basically was a naval court which dealt with things that like fishing, prize winning of captured ships, things of that nature. But what was happening is that Great Britain was taking civil cases to the admiralty courts for decision, which was totally against the law. Quote, trial by jury is inherent, an invaluable right of every British subject in these colonies. So admiralty courts had no jury. They had a judge and sometimes a panel of judges, which were officers of the Navy who made those decisions. The Stamp Act Congress then ended in a controversial note as the delegates drafted 3 petitions to send to the King, House of Lords, and House of Commons. A few delegates did not agree with the wording and refused to sign. The petitions were ignored when they arrived in Britain, but boycotts and financial pressure exerted by the colonists led to the Stamp Act's repeal the next year. Parliament then passed the Declaratory Act, which stated its right to, in principle, to tax the colonies as it saw fit. At that point, momentum had begun within the colonies for more economic independence, and many wanted guarantees from the Crown to protect the colonies' natural rights. So what are the political ramifications of the Stamp Act Congress? Well, Great Britain's response to the repeal of the Stamp Act led to a series of political acts that Thomas Jefferson would call abuses placed upon the American colonies when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Also, this led to the colonies going to war for independence. This was almost step 1 in a series of steps that brought about the American Revolution. Okay, here in week 7, we have 3 chapters with 3 quizzes to take. But I want to let you know before we read the rest of the slide that there's not near as many questions on the quiz as there was on the others. In fact, because of that, this will only be worth 20 points instead of the 30 that's been before. And the rest of it is how you, what we've gone over several times now. I did forget to update. It says the 30 points. It will be 20 points for this week because there's not that many questions. Okay, so where it says 30 points awarded, it is 20 points that will be awarded. All right. Okay, so the post-course assessment, this must be completed to automatically receive the 10 bonus points. The assessment is not required, just like the pre-course assessment. But in this case, when you complete it, you automatically get 10 points. You're not graded on the questions. You're just graded on participation. All right. The directions are there to go through it. The dates available are Friday, October 8th at 12:01 a.m. is when it posts. And then it will time out on Saturday, October 9th. Okay. To take the assessment, click submit when completed, and then you'll get your 10 points. Okay? If you have any questions about this, do not hesitate to contact me. Now, you should now be aware of the information and expectations of week 7. Or, why does this say week 6? I am so sorry. This should say week 7. Sorry about that. So, good luck for this week. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm a bit emotional about our class so close to being concluded, though. So I hope you have a great week, and I will I will talk to you for week 8 next week.